The bell above the door at Rosie's Diner has a tired little jingle. It's not a cheerful sound. More like a sigh. It's the sound of a place that's seen it all and isn't surprised by much anymore. I should know. I've been sitting in this same red vinyl booth, the one with the duct tape patch on the seat, 3 mornings a week for the past 2 years. It's my office, my sanctuary, my front row seat to the quiet, unfolding dramas of ordinary life. I'm a freelance writer, which is a fancy way of saying I'm usually broke and spend a lot of time staring at a blank laptop screen fueled by coffee that's strong enough to strip paint. Rosie's coffee is exactly that. Rosie herself is a woman carved from granite and kindness, with a no-nonsense bun and an apron that carries the ghosts of 1,000 bacon and egg breakfasts. My favorite character in the daily play of Rosie's was Mr. Henderson. He was 76, though. He moved with the careful, deliberate grace of someone much older. He'd come in every single morning at 8 a.m. sharp, hang his worn coat on the hook by the door, and slide into the stool at the end of the counter. He always wore a faded navy blue cap that said VFW Post 789 on it. Vietnam veteran. He never talked about it, but the hat did the talking for him. His order was as consistent as the sunrise: 1 black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, whole wheat toast, dry. He'd eat slowly, reading the local paper, folding it with meticulous precision when he was done. He had a quiet dignity about him that seemed to create a small pocket of peace. In the bustling diner, he'd nod at me, a little ghost of a smile, touching his lips. "Morning, Sarah," he'd say, his voice raspy like old paper. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," I'd reply. That was the extent of our usual conversation, but it felt like enough. He was a landmark, a comforting piece of the scenery. The world could be falling apart outside, but inside Rosie's, Mr. Henderson would be there with his coffee and his quiet routine. He was a symbol of stability, of a generation that understood things I didn't, like duty and sacrifice. That Tuesday started like any other. Rain was streaking down the big plate glass window, blurring the world outside into a watercolor painting of gray. The diner was warm and smelled of coffee and frying sausage. Mr. Henderson was in his usual spot. I was wrestling with an article about local zoning laws, feeling my brain slowly turn to oatmeal. Then the bell jangled. But this time, it wasn't a sigh, it was a clang, a violent shudder. As the door was thrown open with enough force to make the whole frame rattle, 3 men stomped in, shaking rain from heavy leather jackets. They were bikers, the real deal, not the weekend warrior types with shiny new Harleys, but men whose bikes and clothes looked like they'd been through a war. They were big, bearded, and carried an aura of loud, unapologetic presence that sucked all the air out of the room. The low hum of conversation in the diner sputtered and died. Their leader, a mountain of a man with a thick, gray-streaked beard and a scowl etched permanently onto his face, pointed a beefy finger at the largest booth. In the back, there, they lumbered past the counter, their boots heavy on the linoleum floor. One of them jostled a waitress, sending a coffee pot skittering in her hand. But he didn't apologize or even seem to notice. They collapsed into the booth, the vinyl groaning in protest. The whole diner seemed to tilt in their direction, everyone trying to look without looking. Rosie, ever the professional, walked over, pad in hand. "What can I get for you fellas?" she asked, her voice even. The leader, who I'd already mentally nicknamed Grizz, grunted, "Coffee, black, and keep it coming." The next 20 minutes were tense. Their conversation was a low, angry rumble, punctuated by harsh laughter. They complained about the government, the price of gas, the snowflakes in the world today. Every word was a rock thrown into the quiet pond of our morning. I tried to focus on my laptop, but their energy was too distracting. To jag. Henderson, at the counter, seemed completely unfazed. He finished his eggs, folded his paper, and placed a few dollars on the counter next to his plate. He slid off his stool with his usual slow grace. He put on his coat, adjusted his VFW hat, and gave Rosie a nod. And then it happened. To get to the door, Mr. Henderson had to walk past the biker's booth. The aisle was narrow. As he passed, he must have stumbled slightly. Maybe his old legs weren't as steady as they used to be. His hand brushed against their table, jostling Grizz's full-to-the-brim coffee cup. A dark splash of liquid leaped over the rim, staining the tabletop. It was an accident, a tiny, insignificant event. Anyone in the diner could see that. Grizz looked down at the spilled coffee, then his eyes, small and hard, lifted to Mr. Henderson. "Watch it, old man," he snarled. Henderson stopped. His back was to me, but I could see his shoulders stiffen. He turned slowly. "I do beg your pardon," he said, his voice polite, if a little shaky. "It was an accident, an accident." Grizz sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He pushed himself halfway out of the booth, leaning over the table. He was easily a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than the old veteran. "You people, you think you can just stumble through life, making a mess, and a little pardon me makes it all okay." The diner was dead silent. You could hear the rain tapping on the window, the frantic hum of the refrigerator. Mr. Henderson's face was pale. "I said I was sorry, son. There's no need for this, son." Grizz laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He pointed at Mr. Henderson's hat. "What's that? VFW. You think that hat makes you special? You think you're some kind of hero? My old man was one of you. Came back from his little jungle tour all messed up. Thought the world owed him something. You're all the same." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a personal, targeted venom. I saw Mr. Henderson flinch, not like he was scared, but like he'd been struck by the words themselves. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He just stood there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his dignity being stripped away from him, layer by layer, in front of all of us. And then Grizz did it. He reached out, his hand a blur of motion, and slapped Mr. Henderson across the face. It wasn't a punch. It was a slap, open-palmed, a gesture of pure, profound disrespect. The sound it made was sickeningly loud in the silent room, a sharp, flat crack that echoed off the tile and glass. Mr. Henderson's head snapped to the side. His VFW hat was knocked from his head, tumbling to the floor and landing upside down by the jukebox. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. I saw the red mark blooming on Mr. Henderson's wrinkled cheek. I saw the shock in his eyes, a deep, wounded disbelief. It wasn't the pain of the hit. It was the sting of the humiliation, to be treated that way, in this place. After a lifetime of whatever his lifetime had been, it was wrong on a level so fundamental it made me feel sick to my stomach. The spell was broken by Rosie. "Get out," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. She was holding a heavy glass coffee pot, and the way she held it suggested she knew how to use it for more than just pouring coffee. "Get out of my diner, now." Grizz looked at her, then back at Mr. Henderson, who was just standing there, staring at his head on the floor. A smirk played on the biker's lips. He seemed to relish the tableau he had created. He threw a $10 bill on the table. "Keep the change, lady." He and his friends got up and swaggered out, letting the door slam shut behind them. Their laughter carried back inside for a moment before being swallowed by the rain. The silence they left behind was heavier than the one before. It was thick with shame, anger, and a collective sense of failure. We had all just sat there and watched it happen. Henderson slowly bent down. His movement stiff and pained, and picked up his hat. He dusted it off with a trembling hand and placed it back on his head, pulling the brim down low. He wouldn't look at anyone. He walked to the door, opened it, and disappeared into the gray morning without a single word. The diner exhaled. A few people started talking in hushed, angry tones. One of the waitresses was crying quietly by the kitchen door. Rosie stood motionless for a long moment, her knuckles white around the coffee pot. Then she walked over to the biker's booth, swept the $10 bill off the table, and threw it in the trash. I just sat there, my half-written article forgotten on the screen. The image of the slap, the sound of it, the sight of that proud old man's humiliation was burned into my mind. I felt a hot, useless anger bubbling up inside me. What right did that man have? What right did any of us have to just watch? I paid for my coffee and left, but the feeling didn't go away. It followed me home, into my quiet apartment. I couldn't work. I couldn't read. All I could see was Mr. Henderson's face, I thought about his quiet routine, his consistency, his VFW hat, a symbol of a life lived with a code that had been spat on for the sake of a spilled coffee. I had to do something. I wasn't a fighter. I wasn't brave like Rosie, but I was a writer. Words were what I had. I opened my laptop, closed the document on zoning laws, and started a new one. I didn't write for a publication. I wrote for the town's community Facebook page. It was a place usually filled with posts about lost dogs, complaints about garbage collection, and ads for bake sales. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I didn't use the headline that would eventually go viral. I just wrote from the heart. I'm a regular at Rosie's Diner, I began, and this morning I saw something that broke my heart. I saw a man I know only as Mr. Henderson, a 76-year-old Vietnam veteran who comes in every day for his coffee, get assaulted and humiliated. He was slapped across the face for accidentally spilling a bit of coffee. He was verbally abused by a man who saw his VFW hat not as a symbol of service, but as a target for his own anger. I described the scene in simple, honest detail: the sound of the slap, the hat falling to the floor, the profound, deafening silence of a room full of people who did nothing. One included myself in that. I was one of them. I wrote. I sat there and I did nothing, and I am ashamed. I didn't name the biker. I didn't call for violence or revenge. I just told the story. I ended it by saying, Mr. Henderson is part of our community. He's one of the quiet, steady pillars that hold this town together. He deserved our protection, and we failed him. I don't know what to do, but I can't be silent. He deserves better from us. We all do. I hesitated for a moment, my cursor hovering over the post button. It felt deeply personal, maybe too much so. But the image of that red mark on his cheek pushed me forward. I clicked. I shut my laptop and tried to put it out of my mind. But I couldn't. An hour later, I checked the page. The post had 12 shares, a few comments. This is horrible. I know Mr. Henderson. He's the sweetest man. By the evening, it had over 100 shares. By the next morning, it was over 1,000. My little post on the community page had caught fire. The comments poured in, a flood of outrage and support. People shared their own stories. Mr. Henderson helped me change a flat tire in the grocery store parking lot last winter. Didn't even let me pay him. He volunteers at the library reading to kids. He brings flowers from his garden to my mother's grave every Memorial Day. He served with my dad. It turned out that Mr. Henderson wasn't just a quiet man at the diner. He was Arthur Henderson. He was a widower, a retired mailman, a volunteer, a gardener, a friend. He was woven into the fabric of our town in 100 ways none of us had seen all at once. My post hadn't just been about a slap. It had become a testament to a man's life. The next day, I went to Rosie's, half dreading it. The place was packed. There was a sign taped to the door: "We stand with Arthur Henderson. This is a place of respect." Inside, a collection jar sat on the counter with a sign that said, "For a new coffee pot for Art." It was already overflowing. People weren't just angry, they were mobilizing. They were turning their shame into action. Mr. Henderson wasn't there. Rosie told me he hadn't come in. I called his house, she said, her voice tight with worry. He said he was fine, just wanted to stay in for a few days. I knew it was more than that. He was embarrassed. He didn't want to face the town that had witnessed his humiliation. My post, while well-intentioned, might have just made things worse for him, shining a giant spotlight on his most vulnerable moment. Guilt churned in my stomach. The day after that, Thursday, the bell on Rosie's door jangled. The diner went quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. A sharp, tense intake of breath. It was him, Grizz. He was alone this time. He wasn't wearing his leather jacket with the club patches. He was in a simple, faded flannel shirt. He looked smaller without his armor, his friends. His face was drawn, and the scowl was gone, replaced by a deep, weary uncertainty. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. He stood by the door, his eyes scanning the room, seeing the signs, feeling the cold stares from every booth. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Was he here for a fight? To finish what he started? Rosie stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She placed herself directly in his path. "You've got a lot of nerve," she said, her voice low and dangerous. The biker didn't meet her eyes. He looked at the floor. "Is he here?" he asked, his voice a gravelly murmur. All the previous aggression gone. "The old man. His name is Arthur," Rosie snapped. "And no, he's not. Thanks to you." The man flinched. He finally looked up, and his eyes weren't hard anymore. They were filled with a misery so profound it was startling. I saw the post," he said, his voice cracking. "On the internet. My daughter sent it to me. She lives here. She saw her friends sharing it." He shook his head, a gesture of disbelief. She asked me if it was me." The whole diner was listening, rapt. I read the comments. He continued, his voice barely a whisper. "All those things people said he did. The flat tire, the flowers, reading to kids." He swallowed hard. "I need to talk to him. I need to make it right." This was the shock. Not more violence, not a dramatic confrontation, but this, a broken man, stripped of his pride, seeking not a fight, but forgiveness. "He's not here," Rosie said, her voice a little softer now, the hard edge beginning to melt away. "Do you know where he lives?" The biker asked. Before anyone could answer, the bell jangled again. A soft, familiar sigh. And in walked Mr. Henderson. He must have decided he couldn't hide forever. He was wearing his clean VFW hat, his old coat. He stopped dead when he saw the biker standing there. His body went rigid, and a flicker of fear, real fear, crossed his face for the first time. He thought the man had come back for him. The biker turned, and their eyes met across the 10 feet of worn linoleum floor. The whole world seemed to shrink to the space between these two men. The biker, whose name I later learned was Dave, took a hesitant step forward. Mr. Henderson flinched back. "Please," Dave said, his voice pleading. "Please, sir, don't be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you." He stopped. He looked completely lost. "My name is Dave," he said. I'm so sorry. What I did, there's no excuse. I was having a bad day, a bad year, a bad life, and I took it out on you. It was disgusting. It was cowardly." Tears were welling in the big man's eyes. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a man, drowning in his own regret. "I'm a veteran, too," he choked out. "Iraq, to tours. It's not an excuse, I know that. But I came back, different, angry. I see guys like you, from your war, and I get this rage inside me. Like you all figured it out and we were just left behind. It's stupid, it's poison, and I poured that poison on you, for nothing." He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so vulnerable it hurt to watch. "I read about you, about the kind of man you are. You're the kind of man I wanted to be when I signed up. And I disrespected you. I disrespected your service. I shamed myself. I shamed my uniform." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a worn, crumpled wallet. He took out all the cash he had. It looked like a couple $100 and held it out. "Please, let me pay for whatever the damages. Your doctor, anything." Mr. Henderson just stared at him. The diner was so quiet you could have heard a heart break. He looked at the money in Dave's trembling hand. He looked at the man's tear-streaked face. He looked at his own hands, which were shaking slightly. Then, slowly, he shook his head. He didn't take the money. Instead, he took a slow step forward, and another. He walked right up to the biker, this man who had struck him and humiliated him. Dave flinched, as if expecting to be hit back. Henderson reached out a wrinkled, liver-spotted hand, but he didn't raise it to strike. He placed it gently on Dave's shoulder. "What's your unit, son?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice raspy, but clear and steady. Dave looked stunned. He stammered, "A 3rd Infantry Division, Fort Stewart." Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, his hand still on the man's shoulder. "It's a different kind of war," he said, his voice soft, "but it's the same goddamn hell. The coming home part, that's the hardest battle, isn't it?" Dave just broke. He let out a sob, a raw, ragged sound of pain that had been held in for years. He hunched over, and Mr. Henderson, all 5'7" of him, stood there and held this broken giant up with one hand on his shoulder. "All right, son," Mr. Henderson said quietly, patting his shoulder. "It's all right. We're brothers. We just forgot for a minute." And that was it. That was the moment that truly shocked everyone. Not the slap, not the viral post. It was this radical, impossible act of grace. An old man offered money and a groveling apology, refusing both and offering understanding instead. He saw past the monster who had hurt him and saw the wounded soldier inside. Dave straightened up, wiping his face on his sleeve like a child. He looked around the diner, at all our faces, and the shame was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, a fragile sliver of hope. "Come on," Mr. Henderson said, his voice gentle. He turned to Rosie. "Rosie, can this man and I get a cup of coffee?" Rosie, who had tears running down her own cheeks, just nodded, unable to speak. Mr. Henderson led Dave not to a booth, but to his regular spot at the counter. He slid onto his stool, and after a moment's hesitation, Dave sat on the one next to him. Rosie brought 2 mugs of coffee and set them down, and they just sat there, 2 veterans, 50 years and 2 wars apart, in a quiet diner on a rainy Thursday morning. They didn't talk much at first, but I watched as Mr. Henderson Arthur started to tell a story, a quiet one, and Dave leaned in to listen. I closed my laptop. The story I had been trying to write wasn't about zoning laws. The story I had accidentally started wasn't even about a slap in a diner. It was about this, about the fact that sometimes the most shocking thing in the world isn't violence, or anger, or hate. It's the breathtaking, world-altering power of a little bit of grace. It's seeing the humanity in someone, even when they've shown you their worst. I left them there, 2 brothers finding their way back in the warm, coffee-scented air of Rosie's diner, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had just witnessed a miracle. The tired jingle of the bell as I left sounded, for the first time, like a note of hope.